Michigan is the state that I know of that has a pretty clear, well-established procedure for land contracts.
Yeah. So if you see that a deal has a land contract, is that like an automatic no for you? Or is it what would need to be true for you to say yes to a land contract?
So I still buy them. I just look at them more carefully, and I'm going to discount them more heavily just because of the potential for problems.
Sure.
But honestly, a lot of the times after I purchase them, I'll just go to the buyer and say, would you be interested in actually converting this right now to a note mortgage? Because, buyers really would prefer to have the property in their name versus having the property deeded to them after they make the last payment.
What about like a note with a deed of trust? And I only asked just because I haven't heard you mention that yet, but is that a no-no or is that okay? Or what are your thoughts on that?
So I say mortgage, but mortgage and deed of trust are used synonymously. They're just different instruments in different states. So the deed of trust is typically not always used in states that don't require a judicial foreclosure process.
Gotcha. And the deed of trust, if I understand it right, is that the foreclosure process is more of an auction process, right? The trustee needs to sell that thing to somebody else. Like you don't necessarily get the property back, but it's auctioned off and then you collect the money from that. Is that accurate or am I misunderstanding that?
Yes, the foreclosure process, that's true in all states. So going through a foreclosure does not entitle you to the property. It entitles you to have an auction to publicly sell the property for what you are owed plus your expenses. So if no one bids on the property, your minimum bid, what you're owed, then it becomes an REO and then it returns to you and you get the deed, you take it back.
Okay.
But in a lot of cases, if you have a low balance, someone will purchase the property at the foreclosure sale.
That issue with land contracts, I think the reason a lot of people use them, whether this is valid reasoning or not, is this idea that, oh yeah, the deed is staying in my name as the seller. But even if that's true, the minute you sign the land contract and the borrower pays you anything, they now have an equitable interest in that property. You have to go through the proper channels to get them out of there if they stop paying. Like it doesn't actually make it any easier. Like it may technically still be yours, but like the same wrinkles kind of need to be ironed out either way. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. The other thing that really scares me about land contracts is that since you own the property, if someone is injured on the property or if there's like city fines, that is your responsibility. If somebody's out there riding a motorcycle and falls off and breaks their leg, you're going to get sued. I think that people typically believe that since they've sold it on land contract, they're no longer responsible. But an attorney is going to look at who is on the deed, who's the owner, and that's who's going to be sued in that lawsuit. So you absolutely have to have liability insurance that covers you as the owner that the buyer pays for. And I use a company called NREIG. They have a specific liability policy for land investors. And it's about $20 to $25 a month.
Yeah, I discovered them this past year and did a little video on how to do that. I'll include that in the show notes too. But I mean, I haven't researched this to death, but like it seemed like kind of a no-brainer, like just the easiest process. And I mean, it's set up specifically, especially land flippers who are like their inventory is always changing. They make it super easy to like take it off. You don't have to pay for a year at a time and that kind of thing.
I highly recommend them. I use them in my business, but you are 100% correct. I think that people assume that with a land contract, since they own it, that they're just going to send a letter to the buyer stating, you've defaulted, I'm keeping your money, you're done. I mean, you can do that, but that could open up a huge can of worms for you title-wise down the line. The thing that I prefer about the note mortgage or deed of trust is that it's a well-established process in every state with very clear state laws. Everybody knows what to do. Everybody knows how to handle a foreclosure, which is with a land contract. Unless you're in the state of Michigan, in most cases, the process is less clear. Michigan is the state that I know of that has a pretty clear, well-established procedure for land contracts.
Yeah. So if you're in a non-judicial foreclosure state, are you saying there's a way to foreclose or clear it all up with a mortgage if it's a non-judicial foreclosure state? Like you wouldn't have to go to court for that?
Correct. So usually what they do, the first step is that you send the through an attorney, you send the borrower a notice of default, a demand letter, and then they record a notice of default. And then a certain amount of time goes by, and then they record a notice of sale, which sets the date where the property will be sold if the default is not cured. And then depending on the state and the state's procedures and the county procedures, they're going to hold a public sale. The nice thing about the foreclosure is that if there are other liens on the property and you're in first position, those will be cleared off at the sale with some exceptions. Like, I know it doesn't clear off some liens, property taxes that are owed, IRS liens, although that's not really that scary of an issue in most cases. And we tend not to see that in the land industry.
With IRS liens, those fall off, is it 120 days after it changes title or something like that? You know anything about that?
Yeah, typically, I believe that you need to file something with the IRS, and then they will look into it. And I think that they have a certain amount of time to establish their interest in the property if they choose to do so.
So, in just going back to what you're saying, so if you're using a mortgage, it's about $100 in terms of closing costs. That's assuming you're just wiring the money directly to the seller and not using one of these intermediary companies. Is that right?
Correct. It's very fast and easy.
And the reason you wouldn't want to look at title, what if something came up in the past couple of years and that affects your collateral and you wouldn't know unless you did a title search?
So I always pull title. You find all kinds of things on title. You know, the scariest thing that you might find was that the mortgage was never recorded or it wasn't recorded correctly, and there is no lien on the property. So in that situation, you have an unsecured note, and it's just really a safeguard to make sure that, you know, there's nothing there that could interfere with your rights to the property as collateral if the buyer does default.
Yeah. I know if you're buying from one of these notes that was originated a couple of years ago, say it's a vacant lot, are these like really well-established land investors that you're buying them from? Or, because I know a lot of land flippers out there do not know how to do this right. Like they're not going through the right motions. So like, who are these people? I assume they know what they're doing, right? Because they must have done it good enough to justify you buying it. So are these like big nationwide outfits, or what kind of person would you buy from?
So no, I just buy from all individual investors. Some people know the procedures better than others. If it's a complete kind of a nightmare, or if it's really messy, I'll just say, you know, I think you should just hang on to this one. I would say that people do their best on these, but there's definitely things that they miss just because it's not their first business. Their first business is land investment, and seller financing is really a different type of business with different requirements.